And there were a couple of reasons why I knew exactly what they were doing. They were standing there in their birthday suits. I wasn't going to be dissuaded by this. I went straight ahead, right up the middle with the wedding ceremony. I came to that part when I say, well, this is the time when I usually invite the bride and groom to kiss. But under the circumstances, I think you're just gonna shake hands. True story. Another story. I'm at Home Depot. And Marine says hello. We start to talk. No, not Home Depot. I was at the McDonald's muscle car show on a Friday night.
That's what it was.
And there's an older Marine walking towards me. And he's got a Marine cover on. He says, Semper Fi. We start to talk. He says, you were in Vietnam? I said, yes, sir. He says, well, I was at Iwo Jima. Well, now suddenly I'm not going to let this relationship go without being developed. It's like kind of peeling an onion. We begin to talk. And I get a call from one of my TBS 364 guys. He said, Judge, he said, I bought the table at the Marine Corps Law Enforcement Foundation. He said, I paid 10 grand for the table. My wife and my lady and I are only going to use 2 seats. He said, you got to fill it with a, well, there's plenty of Marines in Chicago. So, and one guy was going to be this Iwo Jima veteran. So I go to his house and I say, how'd you like to have dinner with, it was going to be Joe, who was the commandant? The Fighting Joe. Joe. It'll come to me. It'll come to me at 2 in the morning. And he was going to be speaking to this group, and it was a large fundraiser. This group raises money for the children of KIAs, either Marine, Corpsmen, SEALs, DEA, and FBI. And they've raised $30 to $40 million. It's a serious group. And I said to this guy, I said, we're going to have dinner with a 4-star, and it's going to be pretty interesting. I said, I need you squared away. No gravy on the tie. I want you shine, shaved, polished up. He says, okay. I'm driving away, and about an hour later, I get a call from a woman. She says, what are you doing with my father? I said, whoa. I said, who's it? She says, you were talking to my father about going to dinner. I said, as a matter of fact, I was. I said, I'm a retired judge from Illinois. I was a Marine veteran. I said, I need your help. Can you help me get him squared away? I want shoes shined, clean shaven, pressed jacket and shirt and tie, no gravy stains. Can you help me square him away? Absolutely. So I pick him up. Now, he had been in the first wave at Iwo. He got wounded on the 16th day. This is when the Corps turned towards the Kiribayashi dig-ins. He got wounded on the 16th day. And I gave it 3, but he had kept a close register with his first sergeant of how many were killed on the island, how many were wounded, evac, et cetera, all down the line. They had 251 people. They had 173 casualties in a couple weeks. We lost 6,000 Marines on Iwo. So this guy was a very important person, and I gave the 3x5 card to the master of ceremonies, and he gave it to the general. The general came down afterwards. He said, Judge, would you introduce me to your guest? I said, well, he's Glenn's guest. This table's from Glenn. He said, come on. The general comes over, puts his arm around him, and now starts to talk about the significance of Iwo Jima in our country's history and in the Corps' history. You could have heard a pin drop, and you could see the tears developing in all of the guests that were there. Every one of them. And afterwards, the evening was over, he said to me, we're on the way home. He said, Judge, this was one of the best days of my life. He said, I had a Marine Corps general, he had his arm around me, talking about me, what I did on Iwo. I said, well, you deserve it. A few months later, I got a message that he had passed away. And I went to the wake, and I had the little Marine Corps globe and anchor in my lapel. And I went, and I had never met his daughter before. And I you know, you can always tell family. I walked up and she said, are you Judge O'Brien? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, oh, my dad talked about it all the time, how important it was, how he felt that a Marine general was acknowledging him in front of all these people. And as this conversation developed, people from all over the funeral parlor walked up. It was like a hive of bees. And they all said, you know, he talked about it all the time. It was so important to him. And this event happened because two guys said Semper Fi to each other. Every time you hear those words, it's like, get ready to peel an onion, because you're going to find history that you're connected to. On behalf of 364, I have to tell you, I'm really happy to be here to share this. And this poem is now joining that bottle of booze. Let me recite the poem for you. I need a sip of my martini. By the way, some of you may have overheard the comment that I made earlier. My wife sent me a message. She said, honey, remember, I know you like martinis, but martinis are like a woman's boobs. One is not enough, and three are too many. This is my first one. I want to share that poem with you. Let me give you the word. How does our corps and country find such special men as these? The bonding of long years ago was dusted off with ease. Across the moonlit barracks grid sang hearts with tears of pride. The Marines of '64 again formed up from far and wide. We ever shall remember well the battlement taps so clear in honor of our fallen mates, so far but always near. A special time, a special place, rare bonding, if you please. How proud each man to call his own such special men as these. We are pleased and proud to join such special men as these tonight. I have a couple of my 364 guys here that may have questions that you want, or comments that they want to make. You Doss is our reunion coordinator, and he's got a story that is referred to in the introduction that Leatherneck magazine's going to print. But this is a story you're going to want to hear.
He's really good.
Let me say, first of all, that this is the only reunion I have ever coordinated, and it's the last. The guy who planned the first 13, Joe Dalton, is from Saratoga Springs, New York, where he was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and he was used to planning events, and he was pretty good at it. But the last time we had one at Camp Pendleton, he got so frustrated, he said, never again. That's it. No more. I said, Joe, we got to have one more. He said, why? I said, because we've had some guys that have never come. We need to give them a last chance. And I said, we've never invited the wives, and we need to do that. He said, you do it. He said, I'll give you all the advice you need. Well, he was very helpful with his advice, but he wouldn't even come to the damn reunion. I shared this with the guys at the reunion and their wives last night. This is a book called Road of 10,000 Pains. It's written by Otto J. Lirac. Anybody ever read anything by Otto J. Lirac? Otto J. Lirac wrote the first book about the first battle called Starlight, the First Battle. That occurred on August the 18th, 1965, and I was there. Then he wrote a book called No Shining Armor, and that was about 3-3 during the entire Vietnam War. He was in 3-3 himself, And there were a lot of famous Marine names that were in 3-3 that you guys have probably heard about, even though you're short timers at this point. And he said in the book, talking about Starlight, that a battalion from 3-7 and a company from 3-7 came ashore and was attached to 3-3 to go rescue the India Company of 3-3, which had been decimated, most of the officers killed and wounded, and very heavy casualties. Well, I was in that company. I was the executive officer because the executive officer had gone home because of his mother's death, and I was with headquarters 7th Marines because I'd gone over with the headquarters group, but I asked for a battalion on the way over. And I'd been on Okinawa a week. When I walked in the officers club, the Mustang captain, who was personnel officer, said, "Doss, you wanted a battalion?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "There's a helicopter in the air to pick you up right now in that landing zone in 30 minutes. Pack up everything you got and be there." So I did. They flew me out to sea, lowered me down on the fantail of a ship under sail, pitched out a used box that I had bought to hold my stuff. It was a metal cabinet. Broke a few bottles, but they just pushed it out the door and it landed on the deck. Well, that was my introduction. I joined Lima 3-7 as the executive officer, and I didn't know anybody in the company. Quickly got to know them. So when we went ashore the very first afternoon of Starlight, we landed in, it wasn't really a hot zone because General Walt was there, and Colonel Petros, who later became a general, was the battalion regimental commander. And you could hear a ding off of a tank every once in a while, but there was no serious shooting going on. So we joined up with Joe Muir, who was the battalion commander of 3-3. Joe Muir was killed within the next 5 weeks by stepping on a booby trap that killed him, blew him to pieces. He was a great guy. But anyway, we accompanied Joe Muir, and on the way to try to rescue the company, there was a jet flying over shooting at somebody. And I looked up this jet and I said, "What in the hell can he be shooting at?" And the bullets came down and right through our column. Nobody got hit, but the guy was shooting at us. And a lot of guys put their rifle up like they were going to shoot this plane down. And I said, "Don't shoot at him. He's shitting on his pants right now because he thought he might hurt somebody." So, but that was my first exposure to friendly fire, and I had some more during the war. And friendly fire it's a real thing, but it's not friendly. Anyway, we were ambushed on the way to rescue India Company, took tremendous casualties, number of dead and wounded, did not get to India Company to rescue them. So once we had the dead and the wounded picked up and the dead moved out, it was very dark, and we went back to the battalion headquarters of 3-3. And as we approached the battalion headquarters there, somebody was saying, "Is Lieutenant Doss here?" And it was Bob Hubbard, who was from Alabama, good friend. And I don't know how he knew I was there, because hardly anybody knew where I was, including my wife, who had some visitors with her during this period that I'd been in the Marine Corps with. He and his wife were crossing the country, and they were spending the night with my wife in Amite, Louisiana, my hometown. And he was reading a paper, and he was reading that Marines from the Iwo Jima went ashore, and my wife had told him I was on the Iwo Jima. That's when she found out I may not be on the Iwo Jima. Anyway, we got back to the headquarters, and we went to sleep to try to get some sleep, and early the next morning we moved out. And when we moved out, we had a few firefights along the way and took a few suspected VC captured. And in the middle of the afternoon, we had to call in helicopters to take out some of the heat strokes. And we had been on a ship, mind you, and we were not exactly, I guess we were ship shape, but we were not in shape to stay in the 118 degree humid temperature we had. And when I caught up with the headquarters group, because I always stay separate from the company commander, I asked what's going on, and they said, well, we're evacuating some heat casualties. The gunnery sergeant came up to me and said, sir, the skipper is not looking too good. So I went over and I talked to him, and sure enough, he was a heat casualty, and I ordered him evacuated. And he said, no, I gotta stay with my men. And I said, you can't stay with your men. You can't do the job. So they put him on a helicopter and flew him out, and he returned about 3 days later. They did find that he had a slight wound while he was aboard, but the wound had nothing to do with being evacuated. It was heat condition. But he got a Purple Heart for that slight wound that was sort of accidentally found. It works that way. And he did get another one later, and he still didn't have to go to the hospital. But he was one of those lucky guys. Anyway, I mention that because in Otto J. Lerack's book, No Shining Armor, about 3-3, he mentions this event where the captain was evacuated, but he says, according to the S3 he interviewed, remember Colonel Muir was killed by a booby trap, so he wasn't able to communicate about that. He was talking to the S3, and the S3 said that the company commander evacuated himself in the middle of the night, and that Colonel Muir was really mad about it and upset and thought he just ducked out on his own. And I said, that's not true. You know, that shouldn't be in the book. Some months later, I had an email that had a bunch of Marines on it, and Otto Lerack, who wrote that book, No Shining Armor, had his email in there. He was one of the people copied. Well, I sent him an email, and I said, you were wrong. And I corrected him, gave him the straight story about him being evacuated. He apologized and said that he was sorry he was wrong, but nothing he can do about it now. And in talking to him, he told me he had written this book, and he writes good books. And I said, I'd like to have a copy, and why don't you autograph it for me? Well, he did autograph it for me, and I had forgotten about him autographing the book until I used this book to present some information last night to my reunion. For Hugh Daw Semper Fi out old Iraq. I forgot that was there. But what I used the book for last night was to give them some information that is widely thought to be accurate, but is not accurate. So he's got an afterword in this book called Debunking Myths About Vietnam. And so I have highlighted some of these, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to highlight some of what he said. Richard Nixon was right when he said that Vietnam was the least understood war in our history. And so he goes along with that, because it created an anti-war movement which persisted for years and hurt the reputations of Vietnamese war veterans. He says, no one has to read the foregoing pages of this book in order to be impressed by the valorous and selfless service of the people who fought in Vietnam. He said, the leaders, the military leaders, squandered opportunity after opportunity to achieve success in Vietnam. A lot of that was the influence of the politicians above them, however, who had more control over decisions made than they should have had. These whole collections of misunderstandings about the character of the military during the Vietnam War was very misguided. For example, draftees. During the World War II, only 33% of those who served in World War II were volunteers. 2/3 were draftees. In Vietnam, by contrast, 78% were volunteers. And then he asked the question, which is the greatest generation? Minority groups. African Americans accounted for 12.5% of combat deaths in Vietnam. Hispanics about 5%. Figures show that that number is slightly below the draft age of civilians at that time. So they were below normal according to the white population. And Martin Luther King made the statement that blacks were fighting and dying in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. He was wrong. It was slightly lower than that for whites. Desertion and draft dodging. Independent studies have confirmed that the percentage of deserters and draft dodgers were fewer in Vietnam than in World War II. Fewer, not more. There was a lot of publicity about draftees going to Canada to avoid the draft for Vietnam. While that's true, a lot of people did. 30,000 Canadians came south and joined the military to go to Vietnam. Drug addiction, homelessness, and joblessness. CBS had a program where they identified some of the homeless veterans that were on the streets begging for money to survive, but really was for drugs or booze or whatever. He picked out 6 of the most awful cases you can imagine. Long hair, beards, unkempt, dirty looking. Out of the 6 people he chose, only one of them was really a veteran of any kind. And he spent most of his time in the brig. The other 5 had no military experience at all. Yet CBS still stands by that story. So a lot of people that claim to be veterans looking for sympathy or handouts were just using that in order to support themselves and get along better. It was really unfair to the veterans of the day, who had a tough time anyway when they came back because of the way the write-ups were done about Vietnam. Veterans came back, they sometimes had trouble getting jobs because they were considered baby killers, frequently confronted at the airport with the term baby killers. That did not occur to me. I grew up in the South. When I came back, I had nothing but thanks, no derision at all. Even in airports, I never had any disrespect at all. But it did occur. I had guys tell me about being disrespected because of the way the military was treated by the press and really by the press itself, because people, the civilians, developed their attitudes about the war from what they read in the paper and saw on television. Now, this book is about Khe Sanh Valley fighting. It's the destruction of the 2nd North Vietnamese Army Division by the U.S. Marines in 1967. I don't know if you've heard of Operation Harvest Moon, but it was in the Khe Sanh Valley. And a lot of our 7th Marine classmates participated. 2-7 was the primary battalion, although they got some battalions attached to them from other divisions. But that was in Khe Sanh Valley. In this book, the only Medal of Honor winner in the Khe Sanh Valley during this entire thing was a guy by the name of James Graham, a member of our class. I see no reason to read his presentation because he died staying with a wounded man. He himself was wounded. He knew the guy could not be moved, and he radioed that he was going to stay with him, and he knew he would die. For that, he got the Medal of Honor. But he was also credited with killing 15 enemies by himself. Mm-hmm. So he really did the job. That's all I had to say. Just wanted to read that to you. I know y'all probably had some understandings about Vietnam veterans and what it was like. You probably read something about that. Maybe you've read nothing. You guys are awful young. I mean, we're 80 now, and I can assure you we've had our last reunion. Now, if you guys have questions for any of us, we'll be glad to take your questions. If you want to give us some advice, we'll take that too, because my wife still does it all the time. Questions?
You know, you hear the words, thanks for your service. Well, it's my belief that it was the Vietnam veterans that paid a very painful price for the American people to learn how to say those words. When I was on my way to give a speech in Fort Worth, my 10-year-old grandson came along with me. And Fort Worth is an interesting town. In fact, we have Winston Waco Hughes over there from Texas, and Jim McChristian over here from Texas too, ain't you?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. And it's an interesting town because they have the longhorn steers that they literally run through the town. Anyway, we're on the way to the airport, and my 10-year-old grandson says to me, he says, Grandpa, he said, whenever you wear that Marine hat, people say, Semper Fi and thanks for your service. And I said, yeah. I said, there's a lot of history behind that. And I said, would you, you know, there's going to be a lot of people down there. I'll tell you, there's nothing more handsome, more impressive than a Marine Corps dress uniform. You agree with me, Halloween?
Oh yeah.
So my grandson is with me, and the colonel is introducing me, and I said to my Garrett, I said, do you want to say that to these people? And he says, whoa. I said, well, listen, if you get nervous, don't worry about it. Just look at the audience and pretend they don't have any clothes on. It makes it a lot easier. And he says, oh, okay. So the colonel's introducing me, and he said, and I'm told that the judge's grandson wants to say something to this audience. Well, Garrett had given me a hands up, and I said, the colonel's going to just hand you the mic, just get up there and say it. So he's 10 years old. Now, he earned this trip with me because he was a straight A student, and he won the blue ribbon for the drive, chip, and putt. I'm trying to teach him how to golf. And I said, you come with Grandpa. He said, okay. And I said, just remember, just grab the mic and say it. And here he is, 10 years old. He said, Semper Fi and thanks for your service. And bingo, the audience absolutely erupts. They explode in applause and laughter and cheers, and scares the daylights out of this 10-year-old. He goes right under the table. So now the colonel asked me gives me the microphone. I said, that's my 10-year-old grandson. I said, he's in camouflage mode in special operations location right under that table. And I had the chance to give the speech to a lot of Marines. I think there were about 900 Marines there. And I talked to them a little bit. I'm going to take you back to the South China Sea, back to 1965. It's the monsoon season, and a young lieutenant has to go to the head. And you know, the head is 4 55-gallon drums and your level of privacy. How you doing down there? You got any paper? Yeah, how you? All right. So it's in a jungle area. It's in a path area. So it was the monsoon season. So this young lieutenant had to make sure he had a flashlight, and he always carried his 45 on his sidearm. By the way, the 1911 A1 is the greatest handgun in the world. Anyway, he carried the 1911 in his shoulder holster, and he finishes his business. Now he's going back down the path, and his night vision gives him a message. Jim and Waco, you know what I'm talking about. Fuchs, you know what I'm talking about, night vision. You don't see it, it's the optic nerve. What you do is you get a perimeter motion. And this lieutenant stopped. that was not supposed to be there. So he drops to a knee, pulls his 45, hits the beam, and there, from here to here, well, maybe a little farther, that's my son, a little farther, maybe from here to Captain Gibson. That flashlight is looking at two green, yellow eyes like this, staring at the lieutenant. He doesn't fire, looking at this cat, beads of perspiration. Lieutenant doesn't fire, just like that, the cat goes back into the undergrowth in the jungle. Later, the lieutenant learns that that was a Southeast Asian tiger, about 350 pounds worth. They're smaller than the Bengal tigers. I use this story to illustrate that he would not have known that that cat was there unless and until he put the flashlight on him. Think about your duties ahead of you. Think about your obligations. Put the flashlight on the responsibility that our government and our Marine Corps is putting on your shoulders. Right? I'm sure that every one of my 364 guys are going to say, hey, our country's in good shape. Look at these young lieutenants. Smart, talented, able. You're filled with the kinds of things that a garden of quality grows. Competence, confidence, loyalty, camaraderie. Never forget that camaraderie. Never forget that the meaning of semper fidelis. Now, I got a couple of buddies here, Waco Hughes from Texas, and Jim, a question you may have questions. Waco was in recon, and Jim, you are a FAO, right?
Yeah,
AO. I want to tell you one quick story about the power of words. This is a true story. There's a judge in Cook County sitting in an older building that needed repairs. She had all the wonderful qualities of a judge. Smart, articulate, she listened both sides. But she had one flaw. She was terrified of bugs. So here she is, hearing the facts of a driving under the influence case. And she finds the defendant guilty of driving under the influence. And now, as the custom, she looks to parties and say, counsel, are you ready for sentencing today? Fine. All right, state's attorney, give me background. Well, Your Honor, this is his third offense. Anytime he's behind the wheel of the car, the people of this county are at risk. We ask that you fine him the maximum and put him in jail for the maximum time. All right, defense, what do you have to say about you? Well, he's got a handicapped child. He's paying for handicap equipment, and if you put him in jail, he'll lose that, and perhaps it'll bankrupt him. As this is occurring, a bug falls from the ceiling right on top, in front of the judge on the bench. And her reaction is, oh, kill him, kill him, kill him. And the defendant says, Judge, I'm sorry, I'll never drink again. That's a true story. You got any questions for Waco or Jim? Come on, or Hughes, come on up.
Hughes or
Any of these guys.
Any stories you want to tell? I'm sure the guys would like to hear about it.
I just want to say one thing. When you reach the FMF, don't ever do the same thing twice. I went into the same LZ twice, and 5 troops got wounded. Don't do the same thing twice. If you'll do that, you'll be successful.
Ooh. Yep.
What time are you people supposed to get out of here? Yep.
We won't stay as long as you guys are. We're planning between 1800 days.
I know these guys are just dying to hear all the things we're having to say. I was a second lieutenant once, god dang it, come on. No, but I do appreciate all of your service. God bless you all. For fine looking young men and women. and the country is most fortunate to have you in their service. Good luck to you all. Hey, I'm gonna get something to drink.